Hi guys, and good morning subscribers. So today is the 14th of June, and yesterday of course you will all have sat the A-level macroeconomics paper. Very fair paper, I think, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you agree. And those of you who watched the G-economics predictions on the paper 2 macro, I hope that you were equally well prepared, because I think a number of those things which I had identified as potential topic areas, such as deflation, for example, that curved ball, that did actually appear. So people such as yourself, Katie, you need to make sure that you be watching these predictions, please. So this brings me, ladies and gentlemen, to the final in the series of the predictions for the A-level exams. This coming Monday, of course, we have the final paper 3, the synoptic paper, whereby we have the 30 multiple choice questions, and then we have the data response questions which follow. So just on the point of multiple choice, do make sure that you are practicing your multiple choice by way of, I would recommend to you that you use the International Board multiple choice papers. Now if you haven't got those, I think I have put a link, a Dropbox link, in my video entitled, I think it's simply entitled Revision Resources. If you go to that one, in the section below you will find the link to those multiple choice papers. They're much more difficult than what you would anticipate to receive in paper 3, and so if you can do those questions you should have absolutely no problem whatsoever with the questions on Monday. Do remember, on Monday it will be a combo of micro and macro multiple choice questions all linked in together, because of course this is the synoptic paper. So that then, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to my predictions for paper 3. So what I have done is as follows. I have been through the micro paper and I have been through the macro paper, and when I say I've been through, I have mapped the areas of assessment which have appeared on those two papers onto your A-level specification. And I'll just very quickly run by you the things, the topic areas which have been assessed in micro and macro to date on these particular papers. You will know, of course, because you've done the papers, but it's easy to forget. So we've had demand and supply, particularly with regard to the oil industry. Then we have had quite a significant amount from the section entitled Market Structures. So we have had the following. We have had privatisation, contestable markets, natural monopoly, price discrimination, monopoly, nationalisation, perfect competition, and the objectives of firms. So that's been quite heavily assessed already. We've had, in terms of labour markets, we've had a little bit on minimum wage. That was one of your essays. And we really haven't had anything at all to date on market failure and government intervention. Moving now to the macro, what have we had? We have had economic growth and poverty. We have had deflation, disinflation. That was, of course, the first question. We've had something on the effects of full employment and the pros and cons of approaching that very tight labour market, as I was discussing with my students yesterday, having had the advantage of having watched my predictions video. We had an evaluation question with regard to oil. We've had the Lorenz curve, Gini coefficient and all that jazz. We've had something about we had an essay, didn't we, on the negative output gap. We had something on quantitative easing, and finally we also had something with regard to the financial sector. We had something about whether or not it is useful and effective to helicopter money into bank accounts. Will that remove, what was the question, something about will that remove the downward spiral of deflation? And then we also had something about remittances. I'm absolutely astounded, ladies and gentlemen, that that question was on, because it was on the F585 paper last year. So those of you who had watched my video and therefore looked at the, I think I put a link up there to some exemplar material. One of the exemplars was indeed that question on remittances, so hopefully you've done well on that if you've watched it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so what's this stuff here? So, having gone through the mapping process, these are the areas, ladies and gentlemen, which I think are potentially, and I do say potentially because I would also say, as I said to my own students yesterday, it is very difficult to think and to predict what the likely stimulus material will be. So I think really we can only suggest recommended topic areas which might feature more heavily, rather than saying, oh, the stimulus material will be on such and such. But in terms of the micro specification, what areas have not been assessed already? Well, elasticity. Now, with regard to elasticity, ladies and gentlemen, I mean price elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand, cross-price elasticity of demand, and price elasticity of supply. That is generally a favourite of the exam board because they know that you find it difficult to, number one, carry out the calculations, and number two, to then interpret those calculations. And it really is, the emphasis there is on the interpretation of those elasticity measures. So not only learn the equations, but make sure that you can interpret them. That is key, that is crucial. Now, labour markets. As I mentioned when we read through the specification, it has only been assessed once so far, and that is with regard to the minimum wage essay question on the micro paper. Now, labour markets is an enormous part of the micro specification. It's, how many pages is it? Two pages. I would be amazed, flabbergasted, astounded if there is not something on the synoptic paper with regard to labour markets, simply because it weighs so heavily in the specification. Now, it has already appeared in sample assessment paper set 1 and sample assessment paper set 2. It appeared on both of those, so therefore there's no reason why it might not appear on your paper. So do not neglect labour markets, ladies and gentlemen. Competition and market power. Now, there's been a lot of assessment on competition, but let's consider the areas which have not been assessed. Monopolistic competition and oligopoly. Now again, I recommend that you look at the sample assessment materials which have been used, because they come along with the mark schemes, and there are questions. There's a very good question on oligopoly, and there's probably one there on monopolistic competition. If there's not one there on monopolistic competition, I'm going to put in the Dropbox link a nice resource for you, and I'll mention something about that at the end. So those are the key areas which I think might be, and again we say might here, they might be more likely to be assessed in the paper 3. And finally, market failure and government intervention. That is an enormous part. That's 2.5 pages of your A-level specification. That has not really been assessed yet either. So again, look at that. Those questions are always very nice questions indeed. And also look out for, of course, within that we have cost-benefit analysis, which is generally speaking a very standard form type of answer, just applied to the given scenario. And if you learn the structure for answering that, again, I recommend that you look at the F584 past papers and mark schemes. That would be a very easy question should it appear. Okay, what about macro then? Well, the whole notion of ADAS, it's a general thing, isn't it? But you need to be au fait with that and competent with it. Monetary policy has been assessed on the macro paper. Fiscal policy was assessed, but supply side policy not yet. So supply side policies, again, may be ripe for assessment on paper 3. The global context. Now, the global context, ladies and gentlemen, that is an enormous part of the spec. Here we're looking at international trade, we're looking at comparative advantage, we're looking at exchange rates, we're looking at balance of payments, we're looking at protectionism, all of that type of thing, that is ripe for assessment as well. And, let's consider when this paper might have been written, maybe a year or so ago. What was big news at the time? Well, the whole EU referendum. So maybe you might get something here which is to do on the stimulus with the whole notion of the UK removing itself from the European Union. So that would certainly be a very topical one. And the other thing I would say on that is, don't forget that the stimulus can be sort of part micro and part macro. So you could have two combined together, and you'll see that, I'm sure, if you look at the sample assessment materials. And then finally, with regard to the financial sector, that has been addressed in your macro paper, because it's talking about liquidity in the banking system. I hope you use that term, ladies and gentlemen, liquidity in the banking system. And what was the other question that was on the financial section? Oh yes, remittances as well. So that then leaves maybe the role of the central bank and financial regulation might be assessed here. Now, whether or not that will come up, I'm not really sure on that one, but given that financial sector is a new element of the A-level economics specification, maybe it will. So those are the sections, ladies and gentlemen, which I think are more likely than others to appear. So what have I got to help you? So what I'm going to upload into the Dropbox is, there's about 50 pages here, ladies and gentlemen, of exemplar scripts from my previous candidates. They're all anonymised, obviously, but they focus on some of these topics, such as elasticity, the interpretation of them, competition. There's a nice answer in here on monopolistic competition, the usual market failure type questions, and then some of the broader macro topics. So I hope that's of some use to you. I will also upload a Word document which has this brief information in it, and I'll also upload, finally, ladies and gentlemen, a spreadsheet which shows you a breakdown of what has been on the sample assessment materials, so in paper 1, paper 2 and paper 3. And I think the thing to note from that is that things which are assessed on, say, paper 1, that does not necessarily mean it will not appear on paper 3. I would like to stress that point to you. So I wish you all the very best, ladies and gentlemen. As I said to my own students, by this stage you know the specification inside out, you know your economics inside out, and so even if the stimulus is not something that you've prepared for, that has ruined my inspirational speech here at the end. Even if the stimulus is not something that you've prepared for, if you can apply your theory to the given scenario, you should have no problem whatsoever. So ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Very best of luck. Bye for now.